The beggar at the gate. Nathan Cole had spent 20 years perfecting the art of never being surprised. But on the night he invited a homeless man inside his mansion as a joke, the old stranger walked straight to the microphone and said 5 words that shattered everything Nathan thought he knew about his own life. His wife, his son, his mother, his empire, all of it built on a lie. And the man standing at that podium was the only person left alive who knew the whole truth. Nathan Cole was not a man who believed in coincidence. At 48 years old, he was one of the most powerful real estate investors in the country. His name was attached to towers, hotels, luxury developments, and private estates that stretched across multiple continents. When Nathan walked into a room, people noticed, not because he demanded attention, but because everything about him suggested control. Control over money, control over people, control over outcomes. He had built his empire from nothing, or at least that was what people believed. What they didn't know was what he had lost along the way, and more importantly, what had been taken from him without his knowledge. 8 years ago, Nathan had been a very different man. Back then, he had a wife. Her name was Elena. She had been the only person in his life who spoke to him without fear, without calculation, without trying to gain anything from him. She laughed easily and argued with him fiercely. She had this rare, unsettling quality of being completely honest. Not cruelty disguised as honesty, but genuine, undefended truth. She said things to him that no one else dared. She pushed back when he was wrong. She sat beside him in silence when words weren't enough. She was, in every sense that mattered, the one person who made him feel like a human being rather than an institution. And then, one day, she was gone. A car accident. That was what he had been told. A rainy night, a collision, instant death. Nathan never saw the body. The funeral was closed casket. His mother handled everything, the arrangements, the paperwork, the condolence calls, the legal formalities, all of it with the efficient, controlled composure that had always defined her. At the time, Nathan had been too broken to question any of it, too numb to ask, too consumed by grief and by the sudden, suffocating pressure of running an empire that no longer felt like it belonged to him. So he accepted it. He buried her without ever seeing her. And then he did what he had always done when something hurt too much to examine. He buried himself in work. Years passed. Money grew. His name became larger, and his reach became wider. Towers rose from the ground with his name etched in stone above their lobbies. Deals were closed in conference rooms across 3 continents. By every external measure, he had become exactly what the world considered a success. But something inside him stayed hollow. A quiet, persistent emptiness that no amount of achievement could fill and no amount of wealth could explain away. Over time, that emptiness transformed into something harder, a detachment, a practiced coldness, a quiet conviction that people were predictable, weak, and fundamentally transparent. Nathan began treating life like a long, intricate game. A series of private tests he designed for his own amusement. He would place people in uncomfortable situations and simply observe. Would they lie? Would they cheat? Would they show who they truly were when the performance fell away and no one with power was watching? It entertained him. It gave him a sensation that felt something like control, even if it wasn't quite that. And over time, it became more than a habit. It became a philosophy, one that would lead him, on a particular Saturday night in autumn, to the moment that changed everything. It was a Saturday night, the kind of night where the city's most powerful people gathered under one roof and pretended to like each other. Nathan's mansion sat on a hill overlooking the skyline, lit up like something out of an architectural magazine. Luxury cars lined the curved driveway. Valets moved briskly. Laughter spilled out through the open glass doors. Inside, The atmosphere was immaculate. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the room. Soft music floated beneath every conversation. Men in tailored suits moved between women in designer dresses, everyone polished, everyone composed, everything exactly the way Nathan preferred it. He stood near the center of the room, holding a glass of wine, listening more than speaking. His closest friend, Marcus, leaned toward him with a familiar grin. "You're bored again, aren't you?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. He simply watched the room. Then he said quietly, "Everyone here is pretending." Marcus chuckled. "That's what these events are." Nathan shook his head slightly. "No, they're not pretending to each other. They're pretending to themselves." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "So what are you going to do about it?" Nathan took a slow sip of his drink. Then his eyes shifted toward the front gate because something had caught his attention. Just beyond the iron bars, standing on the sidewalk beneath a dim streetlight, was an old man. Thin, worn, his clothes hanging loosely from his frame, his gray hair uncombed. He held a small cardboard sign but wasn't shouting, wasn't moving. He was simply standing there, watching the house with a strange, quiet stillness. Marcus followed Nathan's gaze. "Oh, that's interesting." Nathan didn't respond. Marcus smiled slowly. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Say it," Nathan replied. Marcus leaned closer, his voice low and amused. "Let's bring him inside. Seat him at one of the tables, no explanation. Just watch what happens." Nathan turned the glass slowly between his fingers. His eyes remained on the old man. A long pause. Then, "Do it." Within minutes, 2 security guards were walking down the driveway toward the gate. The old man didn't flinch when they approached. One guard spoke to him quietly. After a moment, the old man nodded and followed them inside. They gave him a clean shirt, a jacket that didn't quite fit, shoes that were slightly too large, but nothing could fully disguise where he had come from, and that was exactly the point. When he entered the main hall, the room didn't stop all at once, but one by one people began to notice. Conversations slowed, eyes shifted, smiles tightened uncomfortably. A woman subtly moved her chair away. A man frowned. Another guest looked confused, then quietly irritated. The old man was seated at a table near the center of the room, right where everyone could see him. Nathan watched every reaction, every glance, every uncomfortable adjustment, every tightening of a polite smile. Marcus leaned in, barely suppressing his laughter. "This is going to be good." Nathan didn't laugh. He just watched. The old man sat quietly. He didn't touch the food immediately. He didn't look around nervously or try to make himself smaller. He simply sat, as if he belonged there, as if he had always belonged there. That caught Nathan's attention in a way he hadn't anticipated. Minutes passed. Then the evening's host stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "as part of tradition, we'll now open the floor for anyone who would like to say a few words." It was routine, predictable, safe. Nathan barely paid attention until he saw movement. The old man was standing, slowly, calmly, pushing his chair back from the table. Then he began to walk, steadily, without hesitation, toward the stage. Marcus stopped smiling. The room grew quieter. Not instantly, but gradually, as if something invisible was moving through it, touching each person in turn. The old man reached the microphone. He placed both hands on the edges of the podium and, for several seconds, said nothing at all. He simply looked at the room, at the guests, at Nathan. Then he spoke. "My name," he said slowly, "is Daniel Voss." Nathan's expression didn't change, but something inside him did, because that name felt familiar, distantly, uncomfortably familiar. "I once lived in a house just like this one." The room was now completely silent. Every glass paused mid-air. Every whisper disappeared. Even the background music had faded. Daniel Voss stood at the microphone, his hands resting calmly on the podium, his eyes moving slowly across the room, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with recognition, like a man who had stood in rooms like this before. Like someone who understood, from the inside, what kind of people were seated in front of him. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest, because that look, that quiet certainty, didn't belong to a beggar. It belonged to someone who had once held power and knew exactly what it looked like from both sides. I once owned companies, Daniel continued. Properties, investments. I hosted parties like this one, where people smiled and laughed and pretended everything was fine. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Marcus leaned toward Nathan. "What is this?" Nathan didn't answer. He was listening too carefully to respond. Daniel's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Its weight carried across the room with effortless authority. "I believed something back then," he said. He looked briefly at a table near the front, where a group of investors sat rigidly. "I believed that money revealed who people really were, that wealth exposed character." A pause. Then his eyes moved slowly and stopped directly on Nathan. "I was wrong." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Nathan's fingers tightened slightly around his glass. "Money doesn't reveal who people are," Daniel said quietly. "It hides them. Because when there is money, people behave. They smile. They shake your hand. They tell you what you want to hear." He tapped the podium once, lightly. "But take it away, and then you see the truth." Nathan felt his heart beat slow, heavy, measured, because something about this moment was no longer entertainment. This had stopped being a game. Something was shifting, and he could feel it, but he couldn't yet see where it was going. Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out the same cardboard sign he had been holding outside the gate. He placed it gently on the podium, face down. "I stood outside your gate tonight," he said. "Not because I needed food." A pause. "Because I needed to see something." He let the silence breathe. "I needed to see what kind of man you had become." Nathan's jaw tightened. Daniel turned the cardboard sign over. The side facing the room read, in rough handwriting, "I'm hungry." A few guests looked away, but then Daniel flipped it again. The other side read something different, in smaller, steadier letters. "I remember." A silence fell that was heavier than anything that had come before. Nathan's stomach dropped, because suddenly something was shifting into place, a shape he couldn't yet name, but could feel pressing against the edges of his certainty. Daniel's eyes locked onto him. "You don't recognize me, do you?" he said. Nathan said nothing, but inside his mind was already moving, searching, reaching. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "That's all right," he said. "It took me a long time to recognize you, too." A murmur spread through the room. Confusion, curiosity, tension. "8 years ago," Daniel continued, "you stopped visiting a certain part of the city." Nathan's heart skipped, just once. "That neighborhood," Daniel said softly, "near the one where you grew up." Marcus looked sharply at Nathan. "What is he saying?" Nathan's face remained still, but his eyes were no longer calm. "There was a small house," Daniel said. "Old paint, broken fence, a swing in the yard that creaked every time the wind blew." He paused. "There was a woman living there, and a man who used to visit." The room felt suddenly airless. "That man promised her he would come back," Daniel said, "that he would take care of everything." Another pause. "But one day, he disappeared." The silence that followed was absolute. Nathan finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but it cut through the room like a blade. "What do you want?" Daniel looked at him with something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not what you think," he said calmly. "I didn't come here for money." A pause. "I didn't come here for revenge." Another pause, longer this time. "I came here to finish a story you never stayed to hear." Nathan's chest constricted. Because now there was no doubt. This was about him, about his past, about something he had buried. "After you left," Daniel said quietly, "that woman didn't disappear." Nathan felt his mind go still. She didn't die. Several people in the room gasped softly. Marcus turned fully toward Nathan, his face ashen, but Nathan didn't react. At least, not on the outside, because on the inside, everything had just fractured. "She was sent away," Daniel continued, "removed from your life before she could tell you the truth." Nathan's throat went dry. "But she wasn't alone," Daniel said. He let the pause stretch, long enough for everyone in the room to feel the weight of what was coming. "She had a child." The room drew a sharp, collective breath. "A boy," Daniel said quietly, "with your eyes." Nathan didn't remember leaving the room. He didn't remember passing the guests or pushing through the doors. He only remembered the sound of his own heartbeat, and one thought, repeating without pause: "She's alive." The words didn't feel real. They felt like something fragile, something that might shatter if he applied too much logic to them. But he didn't slow down long enough to apply logic to anything. He moved through the driveway, got into his car, and within seconds, the engine roared to life. Tires cut sharply against the pavement as he pulled out of the gates without looking back. Behind him, the party remained frozen in a silence no one knew how to break. Marcus stood in the center of the room, staring at the door Nathan had disappeared through. Then he turned back toward Daniel. "If this is some kind of performance," he began. "It stopped being a performance," Daniel said calmly, stepping down from the stage, "the moment he realized I wasn't lying." Nathan drove faster than he had in years. The city lights blurred around him, signals ignored, every thought colliding with the next. The closed casket, the rushed signatures, his mother's composed voice telling him that everything had been taken care of, the way she had never allowed him to see Elena one final time. At the time, it had felt like protection. Now it felt like something else entirely, something controlled, something deliberate, something wrong. The streets grew narrower, darker, and quieter the further he drove from the polished world he had built for himself. The houses here didn't shine. They aged. They held history. They held truth. And at the end of one quiet, familiar street, he saw it. The house, smaller than he remembered, older, the paint worn, the fence slightly leaning. He sat in the car for a long moment, hands still on the wheel, staring at the place he had abandoned. Fear arrived, not fear of danger, but fear of what he might find. Fear that Daniel was right. Fear that 8 years of his certainty had been constructed on a lie. And then he saw a light inside the house, soft, warm, real. Nathan opened the car door and stepped out into the quiet street. The old gate creaked as he pushed it open. Each step toward the front door felt unreal, as though he were walking into a memory rather than a present moment. He reached the door and raised his fist. One knock, soft, uncertain. Silence followed, just long enough to make him wonder if he had come too late. Then footsteps, slow, approaching. The door handle turned. The door opened. Nathan felt the world tilt beneath him, because the woman standing in the doorway was Elena. Older, her face carrying time, carrying years he had not been there to witness, but unmistakably, completely, entirely her. Her eyes met his, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. 8 years of silence stood between them. 8 years of absence, of questions, of a grief that had been built on a foundation of deceit. Elena. Her name left him like something he'd been holding underwater. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She looked at him steadily, searching his face for something she hadn't yet decided was there. "You're alive," he said. The words sounded hollow, even as he said them, obvious, insufficient, completely inadequate for what they carried. "I never died," she replied, and those 3 words cut deeper than anything else that night. "I was told," he began, then stopped himself, because even saying it aloud now felt foolish. Elena's expression didn't soften. "You believed what you were told," she said, not an accusation, simply the truth, and somehow that made it worse. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "If you're going to stand there," she said quietly, "you should at least come inside." The house smelled the same, faintly of wood and something warm, something lived in. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt like life had continued here without him, steadily and completely. That realization hit Nathan harder than anything Daniel had said. His eyes moved across the room, a small table, a familiar chair, a shelf heavy with books, and then settled on something that didn't belong to the past. A small toy car sitting on the floor near the hallway. His breath caught. "Elena," he said slowly. But he didn't need to finish, because at that moment a small figure appeared in the hallway. A boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, standing very still, watching him with calm, curious eyes. His gaze moved from Elena to Nathan, measuring, assessing. "Mom," the boy said softly. "Who is that?" The word "mom" landed somewhere deep in Nathan's chest and didn't leave. Elena said nothing. She looked at Nathan, and in that look was a question, a choice, a moment that would define everything that followed. She was giving him something he hadn't earned, the chance to step into the truth himself. Nathan crouched down slowly, bringing himself to the boy's level. His voice was quieter now, less controlled, more human. "My name is Nathan," he said. The boy nodded, waited. That wasn't enough. Nathan held the boy's gaze. "And I think," he said, the words catching slightly, "I'm your father." The room went still. The boy looked at Elena, not with shock, not dramatically, but with the simple, earnest confusion of a child encountering something too large to immediately process. "What does that mean?" he asked. Elena knelt beside him, her voice gentle but grounded. "It means he's the man who helped bring you into this world." The boy looked back at Nathan, studying him carefully. Then he asked the question Nathan was least prepared for. "Then why wasn't he here?" Nathan felt it hit him completely, in his chest, in his throat, in every quiet place he had spent years keeping sealed. There was no business answer for this, no strategy, no redirection, only honesty, raw and without defense. Elena didn't step in. She let the question sit exactly where it had landed. Nathan exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't know," he said. The boy's brow furrowed. "You didn't know I existed?" "I was told your mother had died." The boy looked at Elena, then back at Nathan. "But she didn't," he said simply. "No," Nathan said, "she didn't." The boy was quiet for a moment. Then, "So, someone lied to you?" Nathan nodded. "Yes." The boy considered this with the solemn gravity only children can manage. "That's not very nice," he said. And something in Nathan almost broke open, not with humor, but with the stunning clarity of a child's moral compass pointing straight to the truth. Something that all of Nathan's power, all of his calculation, all of his careful distance had never managed to locate so cleanly. "What's his name?" Nathan asked, turning to Elena. "Lucas," she said. The name settled into him like something that had always been there, waiting to be spoken. Lucas looked between them once more, then asked with the directness of someone who had simply decided to trust the moment, "Are you going to stay?" Nathan looked at the boy, then at Elena, then back at Lucas. "Yes," he said, "if you'll let me." Lucas considered this for a brief, serious moment. Then he nodded. Once small, but entirely real. It wasn't automatic. It wasn't freely given. It was the beginning of something that would have to be earned slowly, piece by piece. And that small, measured nod hit Nathan harder than anything else that night. Elena stood slowly. She walked toward Nathan and stopped just in front of him, close enough that the distance between them felt intentional. "This doesn't fix everything," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "You could have looked for me," she said. "Even if you believed I was gone, you could have questioned it. You could have looked." Nathan didn't flinch from it. "You're right," he said. "I should have." Elena nodded. Not forgiveness? Not yet. But acknowledgement. A door opening by a fraction. "Then it starts now," she said. He nodded. "It starts now." Nathan didn't sleep that night. Every detail of the past 8 years rearranged itself in his mind under the new and merciless light of what he had learned. By early morning, he was standing outside the old house with his phone in his hand, staring at his mother's number. For his entire life, she had been the one constant, calm, controlled, always knowing what to say, always guiding, always protecting. And now he no longer knew what she was. He pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring, her voice smooth as glass. "Nathan, I was wondering when you would call." He didn't greet her. "Where is Elena's death certificate?" he asked, direct and sharp. A pause, small, but unmistakable. "Why are you asking that?" she replied. Still calm. But now there was something beneath it, something careful. "Because she's not dead," he said. The silence that followed was longer, heavier. When she spoke again, her voice carried the same composure as always. But now it rang hollow. "Where are you?" "You lied to me," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Nathan," she said slowly, "you don't understand the full situation." "Then explain it," he said. "Come to the house. We'll talk there." He ended the call before she could respond. When he arrived at the mansion, she was already in the main hall, dressed as always, composed, elegant, wholly untouched by the chaos of the night before. She turned as he entered, her eyes meeting his with the same calm authority he had known since childhood. "You shouldn't have gone there," she said, as if resuming a conversation that had never truly paused. Nathan walked directly toward her. "How long?" She tilted her head slightly. "How long what?" "How long have you been lying to me?" The room felt colder. Even the air seemed to draw back from what was about to happen. She studied his face, measuring as she always had, then exhaled softly. 8 years, she said. No hesitation, no denial, clean and direct, and somehow that made it worse. "Why?" Nathan asked. For the first time, her expression shifted, not to guilt, not to regret, to something closer to justification. "Because she was going to destroy everything," she said. "Everything I built," Nathan said. She shook her head slightly. "Everything your father built, everything I protected." "By lying," Nathan said, his voice sharpening. "By taking her away? By making me believe she was dead?" She stepped closer. "By doing what was necessary," she said. "Elena found records, transactions, shell companies, assets transferred into private holdings. She didn't understand the context. She was going to expose everything, and when that happened, you wouldn't just lose money. You would lose your name, your future, your entire life." Nathan held her gaze. "So you erased her?" "I protected you," she replied, and the conviction in her voice made it worse, because to her, there was no difference between the two. Nathan shook his head slowly. "You didn't protect me," he said. "You controlled me." A silence fell between them, heavy and final. She looked at him for a long moment, Then quietly, "And look what that control built." She gestured around the mansion, the rooms, the walls, the empire enclosed within them. "Everything you have exists because of the choices I made." Nathan didn't look around. He didn't acknowledge any of it. "And everything I lost exists because of them too," he said. She had no answer for that, because it wasn't something she could redirect or dismiss. It was simply true. Nathan took a step closer, his voice lower now but stronger, clearer than it had ever been when speaking to her. "You're going to fix this," he said. "You're going to hand over the records, every account, every property, every transaction you hid, all of it." Her eyes hardened slightly. "And if I don't?" "Then I take it anyway," he said. "With lawyers, with documents, with everything you believed no one would ever find, including what Daniel Voss kept." That landed. He saw it. The faintest flicker behind her composure, because she hadn't known that Daniel still had anything. She had assumed, as powerful people often do, that she had accounted for every variable. She hadn't accounted for a man who had simply waited. "Daniel was your father's partner," Nathan continued, "which means he was your partner too at one point. And unlike everyone else you managed to silence or control, he chose to disappear instead of confront you. He spent 8 years surviving on very little, watching from the outside, waiting for the right moment." Nathan paused. "He chose tonight. He chose me." Another pause. "And he kept everything." His mother was quiet for longer than she had ever been quiet in his presence. She looked at the window, then at the table, then back at him. Something was happening behind her eyes, a calculation, a final weighing of options that he recognized because he had inherited it from her. The difference was that tonight there were no more options left to calculate. Tonight the numbers only worked one way, a long silence, the kind that decides things. She studied him, deeper than before, searching for the hesitation or the weakness she had always been able to locate in him. But it wasn't there. Not anymore. "You've changed," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "I finally understand the difference between the life you built for me and the one that was mine." Another pause. Then, slowly and deliberately, she walked to the table, picked up a folder, and placed it in front of him. She lifted a pen, and one by one, with the quiet, controlled precision she had used her entire life, she began to sign. Each signature undid something. Each one dismantled a piece of the architecture she had spent years constructing. There were more pages than Nathan had expected, more accounts, more companies, more layers of concealment than even Daniel's account had fully described. And with every page, Nathan understood more clearly just how much had been hidden from him, and for how long. When she finished, she set the pen down. Nathan picked up the folder. He looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with clarity. Then he turned and walked toward the door, and this time, he didn't look back. Not at the mansion, not at her, not at anything that lay behind him. Because for the first time in years, he knew exactly where he was going. When he returned to the old house, the light was still on, warm, steady, unchanged. He stepped inside. Elena looked up from the table, Lucas sitting beside her, bent over a drawing. Both of them watched him without speaking. Nathan stood just inside the doorway. "It's over," he said. Elena searched his face carefully, making sure the words were real before letting herself receive them. "She signed everything," he added. "All of it. It's being corrected." Elena let out a slow breath. Something in her posture released. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Enough to show that something had genuinely shifted. Lucas looked up from his drawing. "Does that mean you're staying?" he asked. Nathan looked at him. Not as a revelation, not as an answer to a question he was still forming. but as something real, something his. Yes, he said, without hesitation, without qualification. Lucas nodded once, satisfied, and went back to his drawing, as though the answer had always been available. It had simply needed to be said out loud. Elena stood slowly and walked toward Nathan, stopping just in front of him. She looked at him with eyes that held 8 years of everything he had missed. Every ordinary morning, every difficult night, every moment of raising a child alone while the world moved on around her. "This doesn't fix it," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "Trust doesn't come back all at once." "I know that too," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something essential. An opening, a beginning. Nathan looked at Lucas, still bent over his drawing, tongue pressed slightly to his lip in concentration. Then back at Elena. And for the first time in 8 years, the thing inside him that had been silent, hollow, and carefully managed, finally began to come back to life. Not with noise or drama, or the kind of resolution that arrives cleanly and all at once, but slowly, quietly, the way real things are rebuilt, one honest moment at a time. Outside, the city continued its hum, but inside that small, warm, worn house at the end of a quiet street, something broken was beginning, cautiously and truly, to heal. Some truths don't announce themselves. They wait. They stand at the edge of your gate with a cardboard sign, patient and certain until the right moment arrives. And then they walk straight to the microphone and refuse to be ignored.